This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It's a little bit cooler weather this morning, but that is fine. It's better than what my daughter was saying is happening down in Dallas, the Texas area. She said they've been getting so much rain, their whole yard is a swamp. They have geese or ducks coming in that they've never had before. So, our God is an awesome God. I want to welcome everybody here this morning, especially any visitors that we might have. Did you, by chance, we've lived here 20 years or so, and I did not know that Father's Day actually originated here in Spokane. And I'm not going to go into the history about that, but if you're interested, look it up. A lady was at church on Mother's Day and realized that fathers needed to be recognized as well, and she started the campaign, and I think it was President Nixon that actually made it a holiday. So, but it was interesting to see that started here. Have you ever fallen asleep? There it goes. Have you ever fallen asleep in church? I am not going out on a limb and say who has done it. I'm sure we all have at one time or another for one reason or another. Maybe you worked long and hard the night before. I know when I was in the Air Force station out here, I used to work 2 12-hour days, 2 12-hour nights, and then get 2 hours off or 2 days off. And I remember coming home on a Sunday morning after working the 12 hours, and I was standing in front of the closet. And Kathy was telling me, why don't you just go to sleep? You're tired and everything. I said, no, I'm fine. I'll make it. And I'm standing in front of the closet. She says, no, really, you need to lay down and just go to sleep. I says, no, I'm okay. And she said, you're asleep. I said, no, I'm not. She goes, yes, you are. You're snoring, standing there in front of the closet. And it's like, okay, maybe I am tired. And I laid down and missed church that week. But, sometimes we've just had a rough week and everything's catching up to us and we nod off. I know with the medications that I've been taking, Kathy's been elbowing me a lot in class because I've been nodding. But it's okay, it happens, when you just relax, you're sitting there. Maybe it's because of our comfortable chairs. You just get too comfortable. Maybe we need to go back to the old wooden pews and all. Everybody's shaking their head no. And I know it's not because of a boring sermon, but anyway, in the days of pilgrims, churches had a person called a tithing man. And he would sit in the back of the church with his long post. On one end of the post was a brass knob that if a man fell asleep, he would walk up behind that man and hit him with that brass knob. If a woman fell asleep, on the other end of the stick was either a rabbit's foot or some feathers, and he would use that to wake up the women. Why they got the feather and the men got the knob, I don't know. But that was something that they used when people fell asleep. And maybe we need to have a tithing man here to take care of people who fall asleep. There are a few examples of people falling asleep in the wrong time in the Bible. The worst case, I think, is found in Acts 20, verses 7 through 12. Now, on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. They didn't say what time he started, but he went all the way to midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. In a window sat a certain young man named Ithacus, who was sinking into a deep sleep. He was overcome by sleep, and as Paul continued speaking, he fell down out of the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and fell on him, and embracing him, said, do not trouble yourselves, for his life is in him. Now when he had come up, had broken bread and eaten, and talked a long while, even till daybreak, he departed. And they brought the young man in alive, and they were not a little comforted. Luckily, we are all inside this morning, sitting in comfortable chairs, but maybe we do need to go back to the hard pews to keep us awake, because we don't want to fall out of our chairs. If you fall asleep in church once in a while, you shouldn't feel too bad. Even the Apostle Peter fell asleep in church a couple of times. Luke 9 is filled with stories that we are familiar with. Jesus predicts his own death and resurrection. Jesus tells them to take up their cross and follow him. Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ of God. And then we go down towards the end of the chapter where a special event happens, starting in Luke 9, verse 28 through 36. Now it came to pass after 8 days, after seeing these things, that he took Peter, John, and James, and went up on a mountain to pray. As he prayed, the appearance of his face was altered, and his robe became white and glistening. And behold, 2 men talked with him, who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decrease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Verse 32, but Peter and those with him were heavy with sleep. Can you imagine? All this exciting thing is happening. Jesus' clothes is changing. Moses and Elijah appear, but Peter, James, and John are fast asleep. And when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Then it happened, as they were parting from him, that Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. And let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he had said. It is hard to fall asleep when you are involved in something exciting or important and you're doing something. You would think that Peter and those with him would be amazed at what that they were witnessing at this time. But no, Peter and those with him fell deeply asleep. Verse 34, while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were fearful as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved Son, hear him. When the voice had ceased, Jesus was found alone, but they kept quiet and told no one in those days any of the things that they had seen. Sometimes we can't help but to fall asleep. And unfortunately, we miss out on important things when we do, or come close to missing them, like Peter, James, and John almost did here in this story. In Mark 14, verses 32 to 41, we read of Jesus, again, taking Peter, James, and John into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray because his hour was coming. Verse 32, then they came to a place which was called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch. He went a little further and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. Then he came and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. We need to focus on verse 38. We all need to watch and pray every single day so that we don't enter into temptation. We all face times when our spirit is willing to do what we don't, but we don't listen to our spirit because our flesh is weak. Mark 14, verses 32 to 41. And again, Jesus went away and prayed and spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them again asleep, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know how to answer him. Then he said the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners." Peter did worse than to fall asleep in church. He fell asleep on Jesus in the hour of need. When Jesus knew what was happening, Peter, James, and John were sleeping. Just moments before his life was going to take a turn for the worse, when his apostle Judas was going to betray him for 30 pieces of silver, Peter couldn't stay awake and watch. I want you to notice here that Peter fell asleep on Jesus 3 times that night. We will see this number again in a few slides. Have you ever been so tired that you were awake, but you were totally out of it? You were just kind of glazed over. Your eyes were open, but you were not mentally there. We read an example of this in Matthew 16, when Jesus predicts his own death and resurrection. Starting in verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised the third day. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus. Peter is going to rebuke Jesus, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Peter was asleep while he was awake. He heard what Jesus said, but he didn't comprehend what Jesus meant. He was thinking earthly and not spiritually or heavenly. Peter was thinking from his heart and not his spirit. Jesus put Peter in his place and woke him up real quick. Imagine how Peter felt when Jesus, the Christ of God, told him to get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me. Talk about an imaginary slap in the face. How would you feel if Jesus told you this? Think about it. How would you feel if Jesus said to you to get behind me, Satan? When all Peter is doing is just trying to take care of Jesus and tell him, "Lord, these things aren't going to happen to you." Would it wake you up? I believe it would. You knew you had to wake up this morning, and so you set your alarm clock. If you have it on your phone like I do, every Sunday morning at 6:30, my alarm clock goes off. But before we had alarm clocks and computers and phones, a lot of people on the farm used a rooster to wake them up. You know, at dawn, that rooster's going to crow no matter what. I don't know if you've ever lived out close to the farmlands or rural areas where people who had roosters and you didn't. And you probably, you know, after hearing them for enough times, you probably want to have chicken dinner the next day, you know, because they get annoying, you know, the way they're always crowing. But you always knew what time it was. In our next few verses, we are going to see how Jesus sends a rooster to wake Peter up. But first, let's see what Peter thinks of himself. How do you see yourself as a Christian? I've seen a lot of doctors the last few weeks, and most of the nurses, when they come in, they say, on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, how is your pain level, with 10 being the worst? Well, my worst pain I've ever had was 2 Thursdays ago when my back went out. It felt like somebody hit me in the back with a baseball bat. And that was the most excruciating pain. So I have a new level of 10, you know, when they ask me that. But it's all relevant, you know, to how you feel and what you think is a 5 and everything. But if you had to rate your Christianity on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being the best Christian that you could be, where would you rate yourself? And I'm sure some days you feel a 10. I'm doing great, I'm a 10. But then other days, you're not feeling as good. And the devil's really working on you. And you might be a 7 or something, But if we ask Peter that question, I'm sure he was always up here to 10. I'm a 10. I'm a 10. I'm doing everything I can. I'm a 10. But was he really? Let's look at Matthew 26 on how Peter looks at himself. In Matthew 26, verses 30 through 33, just before these verses, again, Jesus has instituted the Lord's Supper. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to him, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. Have you ever noticed this verse? That Jesus is telling his disciples here that before this night is over, I'm going to cause all of you to stumble. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Jesus here is quoting Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered and said, even if all are made to stumble because of you, Father, I will never be made to stumble. Peter's putting himself up here to number 10. Jesus is sitting here telling them, all of you, every single one of you are going to stumble before this night is over, and I'm going to be the reason for that. Not Peter. Lord. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. I'm not going to look at verse 34 here, because it is the same as we're going to read in the next slide. Jesus is going to make all of the apostles stumble that night. This event was prophesied by Zechariah hundreds of years before Jesus spoke these words. God knew what was going to happen to them. He knew what the hearts of the apostles would be this fateful night. But again, not Peter. He knew his heart better than Jesus and proudly announced that he would never be made to stumble. Peter is about to have a hard fall. Luke 22, verses 31 through 34. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, which of course is Peter, indeed Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you. Imagine this. Do you think Peter is understanding this statement that Jesus, the Christ of God, he acknowledged that Jesus is going to pray for Peter personally? What? I'm going to pray for you that your faith should not fail, knowing that it's going to. And when you have returned to me, in other words, Jesus is praying for him that his faith will not fail, knowing that it's going to, but Jesus also knows that Peter is going to return back to him. What does he want Peter to do? I want you to strengthen your brothers. Because, what did we just read? They're all going to stumble that night. And Jesus is praying for Peter to be the rock and help all of his brothers, to strengthen them. Verse 33, but Peter said to Jesus, Lord, I am ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. Again, he's putting himself up here, this number 10. And then verse 34, here in Luke 22, is the exact same verse that we would have read in Matthew 26. Then Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny me 3 times that you do not know me. This is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to stumble this morning before the rooster crows. You're going to deny me 3 times. Peter, who is willing to go to prison for Christ and to die for Christ, is being told by Jesus that he is going to deny him 3 times. So what happens? Flip it back over to the end of Matthew 26. We read how that morning of that day went for Peter. Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and of course Jesus has already been taken away. And a servant girl came to him saying, You were the one who was with Jesus of Galilee. But Peter denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you are saying. And when he had gone out of the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, This fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But again Peter denied with an oath, I do not know the man. Verse 73. And a little later, those who stood by came up and said to Peter, Surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you. Then he began to curse and to swear. Peter's no longer a 10, is he? He has come down off of that. I do not know the man. I do not know this Jesus. I am not an associate of Jesus. You have this all wrong. And immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said, No, Lord, that's not going to be me. I'll go to prison. I'll die before I deny you. But no, he denied him 3 times, just as Jesus said. So Peter went out and wept bitterly. Luke records that after the rooster crowed, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Imagine how Peter felt at that exact moment. No, I do not know this man. And Jesus turned and looked at him. Peter, at that very instant, the shame and guilt, Peter ran out and bitterly wept over his betrayal. The number 3 rings out several times between Jesus and Peter. Jesus found Peter sleeping in the Garden of Gethsemane 3 times. Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times. This day before the rooster welcomed the dawn. Jesus was in the grave for 3 days. In John 21, Jesus is risen. And in verse 14, we read that there will be a third, verse 14, we read that this was the 3rd time that Jesus had shown himself to his disciples that morning. So there's another 3. In verse 15 through 17 of John 21, Jesus asked Peter 3 questions. Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? Do you love me? And again, do you love me? Peter replied with those 3 questions, Yes, Lord, you know I love you. To which Jesus replied, Feed my lambs, to tend my sheep, and to lastly, to feed my sheep. Peter thought he was the king of the roost. He stated that everybody else would deny Christ before that day was over, but not me, Lord. I will die for you before I deny you. We as Christians cannot get a big head and think that we can't be beat. We can't think that we will never sin. We can't think that we will not sin. We can't ever think that we are bigger or smarter or more powerful than Satan, because we're not. Jesus himself prayed that Peter would not lose his faith that morning. And Peter was bound and determined not to sin. But Peter fell to Satan's charm in the end. Peter is not the only person who has ever had a problem thinking that they wouldn't fall. In 1 Corinthians 10, verses 12 through 13, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you except that which is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. We can probably rate our Christianity at a large and strong 10. But Paul tells us that we will sin one time or another. Paul also tells us that the temptations we feel, that we face, are not new. Mankind has faced the same temptations since the beginning of time itself. But God is faithful and will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able to bear. We can resist the devil by saying one simple 2-letter word: no. That sounds simple, doesn't it? No, devil, I'm not sinning. But instead, we do sin. But you have to be willing to follow that no response with a strong Christian attitude and follow through. God will always give you an escape when sinning. God gave Peter an excuse or an escape. All Peter had to do that morning was say, yes, I know Jesus. Yes, I am a follower. Yes, he is my friend. But instead, Peter was more fearful of the capture than he was to tell the truth. And sometimes that's what happens to us. We're more fearful of the consequences than to follow the truth. And we can't allow that to happen. God is not going to allow us to be tempted beyond what we can bear. But he's also given us a way out. Too many Christians fall into the Sunday morning mindset. They put in their hour of worship and then leave God. I always call it the coat symptom, or we take Christ and we come in the morning, and Sunday morning we take our Christianity off the rack and we dust it off and we put it on, and we're a good shining Christian here. And then when church is over, we take Christianity off and we put it back on the coat rack, and we go out and we leave God here, and we don't take him with us for the week. We don't think we need God. We don't need to let our Christianity shine. We can handle it on our own. Peter thought he could handle it on his own too that morning. We need to wear our Christianity 24/7, people. We need to put Jesus on and keep him on our whole life. And sometimes, we think, I can handle this situation by myself. No, we can't. And I admit, I've done it sometimes. I haven't prayed as much as I should during the day. But we need to make sure that God is a part of our life, and we just don't put him on here for an hour. God needs to be a part of our life all the time. And that was what Jesus was telling Peter, to wake up. Wake up, Peter, and realize you are as big and as bad, as smart as you think you are. Because there is someone out there just waiting to take you down. And his name is Satan. There are poems and sermons that you can read and listen to online about it's Friday and Sunday is coming, of course referring to Christ. And I'm not going to take the time this morning to read those or talk about it. The only thing I want to say is this: what a horrific day that Friday was for Jesus. But Sunday is coming. On Friday, everything looked empty and helpless and filled with despair. But that was Friday. Sunday was coming. And when Sunday came, everything changed. But on Friday, that rooster crowed to show Peter that Jesus knew all before his hard end. The rooster crowed to let Peter know that even in the darkest of hours, Jesus was still there. Jesus was still in control. Do you know why roosters crow? Roosters crow for one basic reason. The sun, S-U-N, has risen. And there's a new day coming. For us as Christians, the sun, S-O-N, has risen. And we need to rejoice in that every single day. The old Peter needed to wake up to the fact that he couldn't do it all on his own. And we need to realize that too. But then he didn't have to, because Jesus was God in the flesh, and he had professed to Jesus when he asked Peter who he thought Jesus was. Peter got that answer correct. Jesus was God, come down in human form. And Jesus had come to change not only Peter's old life forever, but he has come to change our life today, if we will let him. Only you know how you are every day, how you treat God. If God is in your life every day, through thought, through prayer, through your actions, how you talk to people. We need to be that number 10 Christian every day, and strive for that every day, and try to be that every single day. Yes, we're all going to fail. We're all going to falter. We're all going to sin. And it's how we come back from that also shows what kind of a Christian we are. Peter thought he was up here, but Christ kept showing him that he wasn't. If there's any way that we can help you in your Christian walk, let us know. Let us help you. Let us pray for you. That's what we're here as a family to do. Or maybe if you haven't put on Christ, and that is something that you need to do, let us know, and let us help you